event is being hosted by the Madison branch of the International Marxist Tendency. My name's Yvonne. You can definitely read all of our articles and analysis by visiting Marxist.com and socialistrevolution.org. We invite you definitely to subscribe to our newspaper, which you can do by visiting donorbox.org/IMT Madison-Press. Tonight's event, again, like I said, is on what happened in Soviet Russia. And the reason for that, I think, is there's many reasons for the importance of discussing a topic like that in the times that we're living today, right? I think it's goes without saying that, especially since the fall of the Soviet Union, when the defenders of capitalism triumphantly said that, you know, this was definitely the defeat of revolutionary ideas, the defeat of communism, the triumph of capitalism, you know, all of that, you know, there's been an unprecedented, I think, ideological offensive against the ideas of Marxism on a world scale, like I said, especially since the fall of the Soviet Union. And yet we also know that that ideological offensive, you know, comes and has created actually a lot of baggage in our minds, right? What have we learned? What are our assumptions about actually the entire Russian Revolution and the experience? What do we believe happened, and what caused the degeneration of one of the most important events in human history into Stalinism? And I think these are really, really important questions today, as all of even the capitalist economists are talking about the fact that we are on the edge of one of possibly the greatest economic crises that the planet has ever faced. 30 million plus unemployed in the United States. We are facing a future of unemployment, poverty, cuts, austerity, ravaging not just the United States, but the entire planet. And I think a lot of people are starting to look and wonder, you know, what happened with the Russian Revolution? What was that all about? What are my assumptions? What do I think happened? And so I think that that's just sort of a great little sort of segue into introducing tonight's main presenter. Our main presenter this evening is Alex Gillis of the Madison branch of the International Marxist Tendency. And before I introduce him, I want to gather any questions or any of the brainstorming that all of you have had the opportunity to come up with while I've been sort of going over some of the housekeeping points and the agenda for today. I'm waiting for any of those chats or those questions to come in. If everybody is still waiting to get their chats in, do it now. It'll give our presenter definitely a good idea of where folks are at, what they're hoping to get out of this. Again, the Zoom link will be posted at the end of the event, and so you can join us there as well. So, and there's going to be many opportunities throughout the entire event. At any point, just feel free to chat your questions or your comments or your thoughts. So with that, if there's no brainstorming yet and folks are still a little bit shy about letting us know what they want to get out of tonight's event, I will turn it over to Alex and let him take it away.
There you go. Sorry about that. We are very excited to try a new format, and we'll see how it goes. But we are very excited to get any feedback or any participation. There's so much to talk about this topic that it's easy to go in great lengths, and yet some concepts it could get lost if we go into too many details about the whole process. So we thought to set the conversation that we will focus on the more fundamental ideas on the analysis of what happened in the Soviet Union, and then help the interactions, the questions and comments during this presentation, and more importantly, during the Zoom session, to really help each other to understand what happened in the Soviet Union and the lessons that we should extract from that process for the next revolution, right? For finally find a solution of this system. And as Yvonne was saying, the relevance of the Soviet Union today are more relevant, more important, I would say, than ever, right? We are amidst of a capitalist crisis that doesn't have much of a neo crisis, as we, the Marxists and the international Marxist tendency, we have been explaining that capitalism have internal contradictions that are unable to solve, and to let capitalism to continue, it only will lead us to major crisis, basically a destruction of civilization as we know, a destruction of means of production, an expansion of poverty, expansion of wars, of oppression, and all the things that we hope to be fixed by 2020, and yet we are really in a moment where we are exactly in the opposite. Everything looks doomed. The crisis that is looming over us, they say already that it's going to be the worst crisis, only comparable with 1929. The response to the COVID-19 only reflects the limitations of capitalism to provide any solution to billions of people who otherwise will have access to hospitals, will have access to a real research capability or capacity to create the vaccines and the solutions that we need. And yet we see just the opposite, right? The capitalists are only interested to keep amassing money, sending millions of workers to work when there is no enough means of there is not enough safety or PPE. They are more worried to continue to work only for one reason, because the capitalists can only make money if we go to work. If we don't go to work, the capitalists as a class, as a group of people, they own everything, but they are not able to create any wealth. And that's what is set us apart between workers and capitalists. We, the workers, create the wealth of this planet, and the capitalists take advantage of it. On this perspective, we defend that it's more important than ever to change society. It's more important than ever to break with capitalism and create a new society that give us a chance to resolve these issues. And today, I would say that the first part of this equation that I'm describing right now is very obvious for millions and millions of workers. Capitalism doesn't work, simply put. We know that the institutions of capitalism don't work. We know the greedy and the sure perspective of the stock market, brokers, the owners, the Bezos, and the owners of the multinational bring absolutely no solutions. What the question is for many of us is, what can we do to change this, and what could replace the capitalist society? And for us, the Marxists, we don't come from a moral perspective of condemning the barbarism of capitalism, the excesses of capitalism, the atrocities and calamities that capitalism brings to us from a moral perspective, meaning from how bad it is. But we come from a material perspective, the analysis of how this society works, capitalism, and therefore understanding the really internal dynamics of it. What is that we can change? What is that it needs to be changed? In summary, I would say that for us, we need to change the society from its base. We need to change the way we relate to the means of production. As you think about it, today there is enough factories, technology, and resources to feed the whole planet. We have enough resources to have a hospital and a school in every major city and every major town of the whole planet, not just the United States or any so-called advanced capitalist country, but really all around the world. The only reason why we cannot do that is because while we can produce it, we have the hands to do it, we have the machines to do it, we know how to do it. Those who make the decision of what is produced in this society are those who owns those means of production, which are the capitalists. And as I explained before, the capitalists only have one goal, which is make money and stay in control of those means of production. That is how the Marxists, we approach to the question of society. What is the relationship that humanity as a whole have with the means of production? And when we talk about means of production, we define it as the way the society have to reproduce themselves, either housing, either food, the production of commodities today, really. Even though 200 or 300 years ago, we wouldn't call it a commodities per se, as many of the production in humanity have a more private, a private character, right? People will produce, if they were lucky, they will produce things for themselves in a very limited way. It was one of the advantages of capitalism, to actually socialize labor in a way that labor is not private or have a private character as it used to have before. It's more and more integrated. And this concept, I think, is very important for what we're going to discuss later, but I want to deep in a little bit on this, right? For us, capitalism is a system that have contradictions, that brings oppression, and is literally a straitjacket to the capacity that society could have today if things will be different. However, it was capitalism who, in first place, create this ability to create all what we need. And that is the biggest contradiction of capitalism. Capitalism, compared with any other class society before, has been able to lay for first time in humanity the basis to a society of abundance, a society of rational scientific development, a society that for first time can look into nature, environment, society, the needs of every single human being, and trace a plan to produce what is needed without destroying the environment, without creating wars, without coming back to the barbarity of not having medicines or not having hospitals or houses, etc., etc. That capacity that we have right now is because capitalism was able to socialize labor in the form of commodities, in the forms of forcing to work for a salary, for a wage. And with that wage, we are able to buy things that have been created for somebody else, right? Many times from China, maybe from Mexico, maybe from a state by us in Michigan or Wisconsin, whatever that is. We are more compenetrated, we are more interlinked. Our work is distributed and coordinated with all the humanity. That is the material basis why the Marxists we think that we can change society in something better. Because for first time in humanity, we have that socialization of labor. We can work together as one and decide also what we need to do. And that is the part that we need to change. Now, getting into the meat of the discussion, many people that are exploring how to replace it will look at the Soviet Union really as a bad experiment, right? We know, and we have been told by the capitalist propaganda how the Soviet Union was a failure experiment where there was repression, there was a totalitarian regime, and we, the Marxists of the INT, we agree that the Russia as a failure, as a system of socialism was a failure. It ended up in a degenerated idea of what Lenin and Trotsky, Marx and Engels was defending. And that when we say we are socialists, when we say we are communists, we are not defending that kind of socialism. However, it has to be said today that many of the things that was done in the Soviet Union, especially in the first years, are what we're defending. And in fact, it proved that the planned economy, the socialization or the expropriation or nationalization of the means of production and the workers' control works. It puts a country as, and I will go in the next unit a little more in detail about Russia, but it put a country, they can only be compared with the more undeveloped areas of India today, to be the second superpower and in some measures the first superpower of the world in less than 20 years. Clearly, the workers and the peasants of Russia were on the right track when they took power from the capitalists, and they were able to edify the beginning of a new society that wasn't dictated anymore by the willing of the capitalists, but actually by the needs of the people, and actually based on what the people can do together. And it's in that context that the Soviet Union was able to raise the living conditions of millions and millions of people, almost a continent. And that same thing can be done in the rest of the planet. However, there's some conditions in Russia that they weren't ideal for a healthy development of socialism. And I'm going to finish this first unit just summing up what, from our perspective, are the tasks of a revolution, what we expect the revolution means, and how the first years of the revolution should look like, to be able to compare what happened in Russia or the Soviet Union with our theory and our plans. So very quickly, and please do questions through the chat, or also be sure you join the Zoom after this presentation to deepen on some of these concepts, right? But basically, what we say is that we need a revolution where most of society, the workers and other exploited and oppressed layers in society, we come together, we take power, and the first thing that we do is we abolish the private property of the means of production. We are not talking about our car or necessarily our house, but we're talking about the factories. We're talking about the internet hubs. We're talking about all the infrastructure that we need to produce in order to satisfy our needs. Not only that, but we say that we need to replace the state. For us, the Marxists and the INT, and for the tradition of Marx and Lenin, Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky, we defend the theory that the state is not a institution that comes to administrate society without any interest, but actually the state is basically an apparatus or a tool of one class to oppress another class. Until the experience of Russia, all the states have been creating for a small part of the population to be able to oppress and exploit large layers of the population. On its character is a repressive state, but not only repression in terms of one class against another class, but repression in the necessary struggle against most of the people prosperity, in the struggle of still every day the product of the labor of millions of people for the benefit of a few, as we see today. Therefore, if we do a new society, we have to get away with using the same state that has been oppressed us for millennia and create a new state that helps us to go to the next stage, to the stage when we can say we don't have a state or we don't have any class. That state, which is the beginning of what we call socialism, should be a state that is based on democratic rule. It should be most of the people who are participating in it. It has to be transparent. The leaders of that state, the officers, the bureaucrats, the workers of that state needs to be elected. It needs to be recallable. It needs to be working for the people. It shouldn't be for the people and without the people, but it should be for the people, by the people, and accountable to the people. That's one of the more important things that Lenin defended at the beginning of the revolution, that the state is democratic or it's not a socialist state. Now, we will discuss later more in detail why we need a state in socialism, but the more important concept here is that the state needs to be replaced for something else. In Russia was actually Soviets, which is no other thing but workers and peasants committees of people in villages, in industries, even inside the army, in schools, in the neighborhoods, where people will get together and talking and democratically deciding what to do. They will create the expression of a tremendous apparatus, a tremendous expression of the people in movement, deciding what to do with the economy, deciding what to do with the army, deciding what to do with society. And that's what we call workers' democracy, what we call the maximum expression of democracy that we can build out of the ashes of capitalist system. That state, in within with the nationalization of the means of production, will help us to start laying the basis of socialism, which is a planned economy that is democratically planned by most of society, directed to create and satisfy all the needs of the people. And in doing that, creating a society where finally we wouldn't have classes and finally we wouldn't have states, because we have enough everybody to provide what we can and to obtain what we need. And we'll go more in detail how we envision that system. But clearly, what I'm describing right now is not what happened in the end in the Soviet Union. That's why we think the Soviet Union eventually collapsed for not following this path.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex, for getting us started with tonight's discussion and tonight's conversation. That's a really great introduction. So right now, everybody that's out there watching and listening and burning with questions, we're gonna take a moment to gather up some of those questions. So start chatting them if you haven't been chatting them already. We want to kind of know already what you think about this first part, what kind of questions it brings up for you. So again, my name is Yvonne. You just heard Alex Gillis. Both of us are members of the Madison branch of the International Marxist Tendency. Again, you can read more about our analysis of current events, as well as history and theory and philosophy by visiting our website, which is, again, well, there's a few. Our international website is Marxist.com. The International Marxist Tendency is an international Marxist organization. We have sections in over 40 countries all around the world, as well as analysis, therefore, in many, many languages. You can also get articles, news, analysis by visiting the US section's website at socialistrevolution.org. You can also subscribe to our paper at DonorBox, DonorBox.org, /IMT Madison -press. So again, we are looking forward to making this event a little bit more interactive. So we're hoping that people are chatting. Let me see what I'm getting here, if I'm getting any questions from folks.
All right. Maybe the next one.
Still no questions. So I think, again, we really want to make this interactive, but if there's no questions right now, I think it must mean that people are totally digging what Alex is saying. And so I'm going to let him continue. But in the meantime, as he's talking, something comes up for you, chat us, let us know. We'd like to interact with you. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. So thank you very much. So as a sum up of the previous unit, the theory of the the theory or the proposition from the Marxist perspective is that capitalism, however, lay out the basis for a better society, it has in itself a contradiction, that it doesn't allow humanity to go to its maximum potential. Well, on the contrary, today we see that all this wealth and abundance and potential are crashing in itself by the inability of okay, I think I have a question right now, so I don't know, Yvonne, if you can read it.
Yeah, absolutely. So somebody chatted and asked us, so the presenter Alex just said that Lenin said that if it's not democratic, then it's not socialist. I'd like to hear more about how what Lenin meant by democracy and how that compares to what we know today to be democracy, or what we think is democracy.
Excellent, excellent question. Thank you very much. Well, very quickly, I was explaining before that capitalism has this contradiction that even though there's all this potential, it's not able to satisfy the needs of humanity. But if we see more in detail how that contradiction manifests, or what is the root of it, the dictator, so to speak, the driver of producing things in capitalism is basically the market, right? It's the ability of people to buy goods, what it will eventually or ultimately dictate the decision of a capitalist to create goods or commodities, right? So if a lot of people want tables, because they need tables, then we will produce a lot of tables. Now, in capitalism, the problem is there is no a planned economy. Actually, it's very chaotic, right? We know that we need tables, but there might be 10 factories creating tables. So now there is competition. And eventually there's going to be too many tables, which will create the two things, basically. One, excess of production of tables. And also some factories will crash because they are competing on the prices. I'm simplifying this a lot, but that's what capitalists usually call a crisis, right? When suddenly in one industry they cannot sell all what they are producing. There are too many people selling. So in a way, capitalism have a way to organize production around the market. Now we know that this is not effective, especially for one reason. We know what the people need, but that doesn't mean that everybody who needs a table can afford a table. And the reason why workers or most of the population can afford actually less and less of what is available to buy or what is available to produce is not because we don't need it anymore, but because what we get in form of wage is not all what we produce. We are getting paid for a little part of all the things that we produce every day, and the capitalists are getting most of that money. Eventually, that creates two things. On one side, the capitalists, the 1% today, accumulates great amounts of wealth and money, labor really that we have produced, that they goes nowhere. How many tables a very rich people, a person might need? You know, Bill Gates, I don't think that he will spend all his money on tables. So there is a limit of what the market can do, because meanwhile, Bill Gates will buy 1 or 2 tables. Billions of workers today live with less than $1 a day, or $2 a day. That's the truth. So the market is not defined by what the humanity needs, but it's defined by the market, and it's not a rationally organized, but it's actually chaotically, disorganized, because it's a constant competition of private individuality. When individual capitalism. When we compare that with socialism, we don't have the market anymore. We don't have the expression of it depends what the people want when they go to the grocery stores, then we need how much we need to buy. And also we don't have a competition. So in capitalism, at least in a healthy capitalism that maybe at the beginning of capitalism, one of the expression of what is the best way to produce a commodity will be that they will be able to produce it to a lesser price, right? If you can produce something of the same quality for less money, most likely it's because you are organizing technology and labor in a better way than your competitor. That creates a driver to improve the way that we produce things in capitalism. Obviously, this have a limit, because when there is no need to produce things, capitalists, far from trying to improve the way that we produce things in society, they find ways to further exploit workers, attacking us in our wages and our benefits, moving factories to countries where they can afford to pay less, etc., etc. In socialism, we don't have any of those tools. So what are the tools that we have to understand if our production is good, if we are producing the things that we need, and if we are producing it effectively? So we don't have a waste of materials, we don't do too many of something, too little of something. The only way we have is the democratic planification of economy, and that cannot be done only from the top. The more sophisticated the economy is, the more little parts that we depend to coordinate between different workers and different factories all around a large country like Russia, or all around the world. When socialism expands in the whole planet, the more democracy has to be, the more participation of the working class. Really, what we're talking about is a society that is self-managed. We are not talking about having a small circle of people managing and making all the decisions. That's what happened in capitalism, because there's a small minority who owns all the means of production. In socialism, it will be everybody be participating, not only making the goods that we need, but deciding what happens with them. When we don't have democracy in socialism, we are doomed economically, because we won't be able to coordinate the economy correctly. We won't be able to satisfy the needs of the many, because we don't know. We are not asking, and we are making decisions that are not in relation with the workers. But more importantly, the workers who knows better how the economy is going, because now we don't have a market, we don't have all the measures, won't be involved in the production, won't be interested to make things better, because there is no democracy. There is no interest for them to be part of something that they don't have a direct benefit. So in sum up, socialism, if it's not democratic, cannot be called socialism, because basically society is not ruling itself. And that's what socialism is. the most of society running society. Hopefully, I did sum up answer to this question, but we can talk more about it during the Zoom session for sure.
All right. So,
and I think this is a very good transition to the next part of this unit, which is basically what happened in Russia, right? So we come from this aspect that we know capitalism cannot progress. We know that capitalism has these contradictions that constantly move the system into a crisis mode, and in fact, it delays or stops society to advance, to prosper. We also know, or at least from I try to explain, right, that the state is the state as it is today cannot be used for the neo society. We need a state that is able to regulate society exactly like this, like all society regulating all society, right? It's not one part against another. Now, I was saying also that in my opinion, one of the more important insights of Marx and Engels when they started studying capitalism is that they don't see those shortcomings of capitalism with pessimism, but they arrive to the scientific conclusion that in first time in history, capitalism has done one thing that no other system has done before, which is lay the basis for this society. Why Marx and Engels think, and they are so optimistic, that finally we can create a new society that is not based on classes, is because two elements. One, the economy and the production of goods is socialized, as I was explaining before, right? We are all working to produce things that we are sharing in a way that I can buy something that was cultivated in Chile, or I can buy wine that's coming from Spain, or I can buy a radio that maybe was put together in China. That socialization of labor, the fact that most of society are working for a wage, and in that way they are participating in this universal, as you may, system of production of goods, is something very, very progressive. Also, in doing that, the capitalism has to modernize the countries in a way that fosters this kind of production, right? The creation of structures like roads, like communications, all kind of things that are needed. Now, when Marx and Engels talk about these conditions, they are not thinking necessarily on countries like Russia, where from a capitalist perspective in 1917, Russia was a backward capitalist country. The revolution that happened in other countries, for instance, in Europe, where the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, become this progressive force that they are able to help the production of goods, they are able to modernize the country, they are able to go with the millennia-long domination of religion in every aspect of society. These revolutions, like the French Revolution, which in my opinion is one of the classic revolutions of capitalism, which you can see the promise of a new society that was getting away with a lot of atrocities and backwardness of the feudalism system didn't happen in Russia. Now, some socialist tendencies to very close to 1917 will defend the idea that the socialist revolution could not start in Russia, and that most likely Russia wasn't able to do a socialist revolution. Rather, they should have a bourgeoisie revolution. They should have a capitalist revolution that will be able to modernize the country, to prepare the country, to create the millions of proletarians, to reform the country, the farmers, and in all, create those bases that Marx and Engels are speaking about, the socialization of the goods, this modernization of the country, creating the material basis for socialism. Now, and I'm going to go very fast because I see my time is running out, but the other tendency or other current in socialism, started by Lenin and Trotsky in 1904, 1905 for sure, is acknowledging that this progressive stage of capitalism that is able to transform in a progressive way, and when I say progressive, obviously I'm talking about this emancipation of humanity to be able to produce things, right? It's not progressive in terms of what it means for millions of new workers and proletarians in England, in France, in America, where they were living in conditions almost like animals. I mean, the conditions of humanity as a whole wasn't much better for the poor people. But for first time, we have the technology and the organization of labor that allow us to finally get the neo society, which is without classes, which is socialism, right? But even those aspects that capitalism was able to bring in some countries were not present in Russia. Well, on the contrary, what we see in Russia is the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie of Russia, is very weak. It's not able to even put down the feudalism and the Tsar system. Well, on the contrary, was associating with the Tsar, associating with the old feudalism system, absolutely not transforming anything. In fact, the only force in Russia that was able to get put down the class society of feudalism, it was the peasants and the working class, because the bourgeoisie wouldn't have an independent role. Now, the theory that Trotsky finally put it together as the permanent revolution comes to complement the vision of Marx and Engels in the following formula. When capitalism cannot play this progressive role anymore because it's in an organic crisis, means that it have exhausted its progressive role as a revolutionary force in society. Capitalism is unable to develop countries that were backward and they didn't do the revolution in the next period. That is the premise of Lenin and Trotsky in Russia. Yeah, for sure we don't have all the material basis for socialism, but we cannot expect that the capitalism or the bourgeoisie in Russia is going to do it. Rather, al contrary, it's the working class and the peasantry that has to figure out how to modernize the country and go to socialism in one move. And that's what it was tried to be done in Russia. This can only work, this proposal, if Russia can immediately has the support of another country that goes into a socialist revolution. Imagine if the backward Russia, who is very modernized, that it doesn't have the benefits of a full bourgeoisie or capitalist society, has the help of the workers of Germany, for instance, in their own socialist revolution, where they are able to share the technology, where they are able to share the surplus of goods, where they are able to support the fast development of Russia. Russia will have been quickly catch up with some of the tasks that the bourgeoisie didn't do yet, or they were simply put unable to do in Russia, done by us. And we call that the permanent revolution because we go, so to speak, we take under our control, our initiative, the working class initiative, both the task of the bourgeoisie revolution, this modernization and organization of labor, but also we're moving into socialism coming in one motion. That task in a country of Russia means a lot of difficulties. So, for instance, if we want to do a modernization of the country, but Russia quickly fall into invasion of 14 armies at the beginning of the revolution of 14 different countries. So get the country into a second war. Then we have a civil war, which means that the first years of the revolution in Russia, even though there was a humongous, a wonderful liberation of humanity in terms of many things that it was more advanced than even advanced capitalist countries. Things like the divorce, things like the abolition of prostitution, the things like the question of the the oppressed nationalities. Things like actually modernize the country, start getting electricity, start getting roads, start building houses. All this start like a big explosion of potential in Russia, but it was delayed also by the lack of technique, the lack of industry, the lack of modernization of the country, but also by the tremendous toll that it took to be in the wars that comes right after the revolution. In fact, during the revolution of October 1917, you can count the number of people who died in less of in the tens of hundreds at the most. Most of the people who died in Russia in those years, it was before and after the revolution. During the First World War, which was a capitalist product, And it was after, because the invasion of different armies and eventually a civil war with elements of Tsarism and the old army defending the old system in Russia. This set the country even more backwards. So in a moment where we're trying to emancipate Russia and the Soviet Union territories into a better production in a way that we can produce for everybody, we are in a contradiction where we are producing less. We are in a crisis of destruction. We are in a crisis of not being able to organize the country, organize the cities. This put a lot, I'm not going to go in detail right now, but this put a lot of contradictions to the process of socialism. I will say the following. If we wanted to have a democratic state, it is not a formalistic or rhetoric question of, oh, we want a democratic, so we call it democratic system, so might be. In order to have a society that is able to democratically run itself, we need people that have enough to live. We need people who doesn't work 60 hours a week, but actually less. We need people who have access to schools and education. We need conditions, material conditions, in order for society to be able to manage society, to be an active element of conduct society, right? That's what we didn't have in the first years of Russia because the wars, because the backward character of capitalist Russia. And the only hope, and Lenin and Trotsky, as soon as they could, they create the Third International, and the task was to create the basis for a revolution in another country, which the opportunities happen, and we can talk more in detail later. But in the isolation of the Soviet Union and in the backwardness, what happened is the following. Meanwhile, some of the advantages or benefits of a planned economy, some of the advantages of the nationalization of the means of production start render some benefits. During that process, there also was a crystallization of a NeoPolitical Caste, a group of people that start occupying places of power. We call the bureaucracy, the administrators that took a specific weight in society. They were needed. They were the people who, in the previous system, they knew how to read, they knew how to run factories. They were the people who were used to be carrierists, meaning that they look for a place under the sun, right? Meanwhile, the best of the Bolsheviks, the best of the workers were working very hard on the factories, fighting with bravery in the front lines against the reaction. This group of administrators, this group of people were unaccounted. It wasn't there was no democracy, not because they're unwilling to have democracy in Russia, but because there wasn't the material conditions to create democracy in Russia. But where on the contrary, hardship and backwardness in the economy create the basis for this crystallization. And eventually, this bureaucracy took any element of democracy in Russia. It becomes what it should be, a workers' state where workers, students, and persons can work together and decide together what is the future of Russia and humanity. It becomes in its opposite. And it becomes a caricature of what we call socialism. So far from creating a society that eventually we wouldn't even have a state or in a class, when we have a humanity that is not fighting among each other, it becomes exactly the opposite. A bureaucracy that it was able to take the perks of the planned economy and in a way oppress politically most of the workers in the Soviet Union. And I will finish this characterization and then we can go more in detail. But the key point here is, if the workers in the Soviet Union would have recognized that in order to have a triumphant socialism, they shouldn't accept the Stalinist and the bureaucracy propaganda that this is it, socialism with a very strong state that it represses, that it strangulates any discussion, any debate, that is actually guaranteeing that the planned economy will at one point fail, as I explained before. And the working class and the workers in Russia will have struggled for the second revolution, no economic revolution. The main task of the Soviet Union were already complete. The more difficult task is to fight against the capitalist class, to expropriate the means of production, and to create a democratic a workers' state. They guarantee the basis for the next stage, which is communism. That particular element, the democratic workers' control state, is what it fell in Russia for very concrete conditions. And it's exactly what we should get as one of the lessons that we should extract here, right? That to be able to change society from its base is not enough. We need to guarantee that this new society have a state or a workers' democracy that is able to defend those victories of the working class taking power in a way that guarantees there is no corruption, in a way that guarantees that everybody, as I said before, democracy not in the capitalist sense of the word, like voting every 4 years and letting the same class making all the decisions, but democracy in a very active way where most of the people are involved in society, they are making decisions together, learning from their mistakes, creating discussions about what we need to do about the question of housing, what we need to do about the question of environment. When that was stolen by the bureaucracy for some of the material conditions that I pointed out already, the fate of the Soviet Union was set, and it was up to 1972 where the means of production, the capacity of the planned economy to succeed and produce new things was going up. I mean, at one point, the Soviet Union coming from conditions that it could be comparable to the poorest part of Calcutta, India, right? Absolutely no development of any capacity. In less than 20 years, as I was saying before, it was already comparing itself with United States and Europe in many different measures, like the production of iron, the production of houses, the production of miles of railroad, etc., etc. And we see again and again many of those successes of the Soviet Union, like for instance the space race, the achievements on science. That happens during all the decades, even well into the 1980s. Those advances of the economy and research are thanks to the planned economy. But they were, if capitalism have a straitjacket, which is the private ownership of the means of production, it's no less true that the Soviet Union have a straitjacket. In this case, it's not who owns the means of the production, but who is politically controlling society, which it wasn't the population, but a small part of it, the bureaucracy. Eventually, that same lack of democracy, that same totalitarian caricature of what we really were defending as Bolsheviks, as Marxists, ended up on a stagnation of economy, on a lack of participation of the workers in it, on a maximum excess of corruption or robbery, to a point the society started collapsing. However, even with that, Russia or the Soviet Union in 1989 to 1991 restored capitalism by the same willing of the bureaucracy. In reality, in the 1980s, the economy of Russia was more than ready to go to real socialism or true Marxist socialism. If the working class would have been organized in the Soviet Union to take the power back from the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy at one point saw that the stagnation of the economy was ending not only their perks, the benefits of being in control of politically of the country, but actually that there was a major discontent of the workers and most of the population, and eventually they decided to jump ship, to sell, as you may, wholesale rather, the property of the state, the property of the Soviet Union into layers of the Communist Party, the bureaucracy really at that point, and who are the new rich people today in Russia. The lessons definitely, hopefully, this I can clarify that the problem of socialism in Russia is not due that the planned economy is no far much better than capitalism. It's further, I think, it's proven, or that workers cannot control and do the planned economy. But I think the lessons is how we have to defend victories also in the political spectrum, political agenda after the revolution.
All right, so that concludes the second part of tonight's presentation, study group, and discussion that we're trying out. Again, this is a new format, everybody. If you've joined us recently and you haven't heard me talk about it yet, we're trying something new out. Tonight's study group has a presentation component that is broken up into different pieces to allow people to chat us questions that hopefully the presenter whom you've been listening to tonight, his name is Alex. Alex is a comrade here in the Madison branch of the International Marxist Tendency. My name's Yvonne. I'm also a member of the Madison branch of the IMT. So we are streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube. We totally want you to chat us your questions, your comments, your thoughts about what you're hearing, about what you're thinking about. I see a couple that have come in already. So one question for the presenter is, why were the capitalists not able to do a revolution in Russia, to do a capitalist revolution in Russia? And then another question for Alex, for our presenter, is something I hear a lot is people who are trying to point out the mistakes or the flaws in the Soviet Union, is that somehow socialism is incompatible with human nature. And so how do you answer those kinds of arguments that socialism is incompatible with human nature? And why do you think that kind of a question is one that keeps resurfacing? And then another question, we'll do one more before we turn it over for our third section of the presentation. One more question is, what do you think practically we can do to overcome sort of this idea that, you know, that this idea of like socialism is only a bureaucracy in, you know, the Stalinist sort of version that we're talked to about, or that we're told about? How does that idea that we've inherited sort of in our mass consciousness, right, in the mainstream consciousness, how do we overcome that? So again,
could you repeat the first question, because I was taking notes and I forget to do.
Not a problem. So the first question was from somebody who wants to know, how come the capitalists weren't able to do a revolution in Russia? Why was it a socialist revolution? Why, you said that the capitalists were unable to do a revolution, to do a bourgeois, I believe, revolution. So why weren't they able to, or why didn't it happen in that way? So before I turn it over back to Alex to answer some of those questions and to continue a little bit with tonight's presentation, we just want you to know that you can chat us any question at any time. You don't have to sort of wait for these breakouts. At the end of tonight's live stream, you'll also be able to see, we'll post a Zoom link in the chat, both on YouTube and on the Facebook live stream, so that you can come hang out with us in a Zoom chat room. If you don't want to ask your questions publicly, we understand. That's totally fine. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to chat with you. Also, if you like what you're hearing, or you're interested in learning more, you can also contact us in Madison directly at madison@socialistrevolution.org. You can also read our articles on Marxist.com and socialistrevolution.org. Great places. If you want to subscribe to the paper, which is a really great way to also support our organization, you can subscribe to the paper by going to donorbox.org/IMT Madison -press. And so I will leave it there, and I'll turn it back over to Alex to answer some of those questions and to continue with his presentation. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is great that we're having questions. I think we are learning about this interactive. I just realized that I think I purposely jumped some of the topics or lines that I have to keep this presentation compacted. I think I present most of the main ideas, but there is a lot of it. There is a lot of what happened from February of 1917 to October of 1917, the first 4 or 5 years after 1917, the period of the war, the period after the war, the death of Lenin. There's a lot of stages that definitely, and also, how the Soviet Union influenced other movements around the world, and also the fate of socialist revolution in other countries. The goal of this presentation obviously is not to talk about all those things, but put at least try to put into a shared focus what is socialism, what happened in the Soviet Union, and what we can learn from it. And I'm very happy that the questions are very relative to these topics. But if you have other ideas or other topics you want to explore, very soon, I think I'm going to wrap up with this actually after I finish with this block. I think the Zoom conversation will be the best way to really deepen in different areas of this topic, because there is absolutely a lot. We didn't talk about the question of the women, the youth, and culture, for instance, of the Soviet Union, which I will touch a little bit now. But there is a lot of things to learn from sure. Hopefully, I did a okay job to sum up on the more important aspects, right? One question that I heard is, how can we combat this propaganda of either the socialism is not compatible with human nature, right? Or this other idea that the Soviet Union is I believe, this deformed bureaucratic, and thus any socialism is pretty much condemned to be the same totalitarian regime, right? I would say that exercise like we're doing today are very important. Reading is very important. Trotsky specifically, right, dedicated the last part of his life, and as he said many times, the more important part of his life. However, he was one of the leaders of the Soviet, the October Revolution in Russia. He was the architect of the Red Army, which effectively organized 5 million workers to fight against the reaction, both inside and outside Russia. And yet, for Trotsky, as a leader of the Bolshevik Party, find himself more useful for the working class and the fate of socialism, fighting against the bureaucracy and explaining in detail why what's happening in Russia, and it's not a direct expression of the Marxist ideas or the ideas of Lenin or the agenda and the aspiration of the workers and peasants that sacrifice and fight for a new society, for a society without classes, without oppression, right? And how some years later, between 10 and 15 years, you have this crystallization, this consolidation of a caricature, right? They have nothing to do with our ideas. Obviously, the capitalist propagandists, and not only the capitalists for their own interest, they want the workers not to know the truth about this. But more importantly, even within the left, even within the working class and the youth, we have people that they will say anything to try once more to fix capitalism instead of replace it. And I think that that creates a big difference how we explain things, right? If we think or if we have an illusion that capitalism is the only thing we can have, eventually we will defend it and we will try to disprestige any other alternative, right? Now, I think for any healthy worker who put this idea that socialism is unhealthy, I will say the following: if what is very counterintuitive is capitalism, because most of humanity, they are not working every day up just to get very rich or insanely rich. You know, I don't know a lot of people who wake up in the morning and say, my life is not accomplished because I don't have 160 billions like John Bezos. You know, actually, most people what they want is have their needs satisfied for them, their families, their community, and there is a reason for that. Especially when you understand that you cannot survive by your own. Like it's better, and it's better for everybody working together. Even the capitalists have to use that if they want something accomplished. They call it project management, they call it teamwork, they call it however you want it, but they understand this idea that alone we cannot do. We can do it together. You know, the idea that even in the socialism is not compatible with human nature goes against every single part of humanity. Every time some creative tool or meaningful tool is put on the hands massively of workers and the Jews, they come up with ideas to collaborate. I mean, no other better example than internet, which never was planned to seek collaboration and create virtual communities or global communities of all the people. That was far from the interest of the U.S. military who put forward the ARPA project, whatever, the internet more as a way to secure their communications in a distributed, not distributed way. But put it on the hands of the workers, it becomes this amazing explosion of ideas and ways to collaborate together, many times without any interest in it, right? Like projects like open source or like YouTube's and a lot of explosion of things. They are very useful for everybody. That if you think about it, people don't do it to get more richer. They don't do it to oppress other people. And yet on the other side, what is really incompatible with human nature is to live in poverty. What is really incompatible with human nature is this barbarism that we see every day, these imperialist armies, these oppressions, the racism, and all the oppressions. They are reproduced by the media, by the capitalists, because they are interested to divide us. That is what really is a cancer in humanity today, the capitalist way of life. And I cannot be convinced that this is very natural for us. Now, but we also have to explain that socialism is not a romantic idea that we all wake up one day and we all get along and we know how to work together and we go down with the past and we create a new society. If any, is well the contrary. To go from a class society to a classless society requires a concerted effort for most of the population to fight against the structures that have chained us and oppressed us and exploited us for millennia, for thousands of years. It means that we have to be vigilant, that every step we do in this new society that we can create is created in a democratic way. It's created with the purpose to eliminate the state, not just to replace the state with a democratic state, but to eliminate that state. It's created in a way that rational and scientific approach to any question will be first, and not the interest of one or another group of the population or one or another bureaucratic caste of the new state. That's what we need to explain. We need, and happily there is no one sentence that can explain all this, but those who are looking for ideas, they will have the time to discuss with us the details about what we're discussing and the rationality of it. What we are presenting here is a scientific project. It's a project that is based on the material condition and the possibilities that we have today to change society, and it's not based on a romantic idea. And I think, unhappily, that is what is purposely distributed or propagandistically explained by many bourgeoisie agents, which is like, you want a pie in the sky, you want something that is unrealistic. But it's unrealistic to think that capitalism can give us anything good or better, as we see today with the COVD and the crisis. So I think basically we need to read, we need to study the revolution in detail, the Russian Revolution, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we have to start explaining that our proposal is much better than the capitalist one. The other argument, I will finish this question, this answer with the following, right? I heard also, they say, well, socialism was tried, it fails, so we don't need to try again, right? It's kind of like this very empiric way to say, didn't work, don't bother to do it again. Well, I would say the same people that, um, revolutions are important when they succeed, but we often forget all the attempts of those revolutions and those changes before. And a good example of that is the capitalist system. The capitalist system didn't show up one day in 1960, in 1600s or 1700s, say, hey, we are here to replace feudalism, get everybody behind us, and let's do a revolution. You can see the very origins of the idea of capitalism, this neo idea of trade, this idea of commoditization, this idea of departing from the feudalism mode of production back to the 1300s. And actually, you have contradiction, political struggles of power starting in the 14 and 1500s. It took capitalism close to 400 years to consolidate power. You know, if we compare with the working class and the tax for socialism, we already in our first 100 years of existence, we already have one experiment, which was the Paris Commune in 1871. And no 50 years later, we have another experiment or another successful revolution, which is the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Union, which put the question of is it possible to do a social revolution even in a more realistic and evident way that it can be done and that we will be able to do it. So I think that's another thing, right? Like we have to put things in perspective and start explaining talking on the language of history and ideas, but also examples on this. The other question that I heard is why there was no a capitalist revolution in Russia. Maybe I went too fast on this, and I will apologize for this. Given time, I mean, at one point, undoubtedly, maybe the bourgeoisie of Russia could have some kind of bourgeoisie revolution in Russia. Now, what will be the condition for that? The independent development of the bourgeoisie in Russia, growing strong enough, they are able to do mainly two things. One, group the working class and the peasantry behind them, and with that, be able to defeat the Tsar or the Tsar system. That basically is what the bourgeoisie have accomplished in other countries when they have been a democratic bourgeoisie revolution. Now, what we have seen since the organic decay of capitalism, when we consider capitalism have not a progressive role, is that there is no independent bourgeoisie that is able to do it, because at the point that economy is developed at that degree, that maybe they could create those bases, it's already under the influence of the imperialist powers. Because when you are in an organic crisis of capitalism, which we can discuss this more in detail, one thing is true. You don't have neo markets. You cannot even develop your own markets for your own benefit as the Russian bourgeoisie, because are the imperialist capitalists who are looking at your market and looking at your resources as the gateway to resolve their own crisis. So because the capitalism is in decay, because capitalism is in crisis, there is the necessary room or the necessary conditions for any bourgeoisie who have not developed this strength at the point of the crisis of capitalism to a point that they can do this independently. In fact, as you think about it, I will be willing to say that with a couple exceptions, after the Second World War, there is no absolutely one single country in the world that it have been able to modernize independently the country without the tentacles of the imperialist powers, and eventually sinking those countries not into developing forward, but actually going backwards and sinking those countries into poverty and destruction. And for every country that they promised us there was a developing country, meaning that they were getting to that point of modernization, we have exactly the reverse process at the next crisis, right? All those countries in the 80s that they were saying they were developing, Argentina, Brazil, or many other countries that today are totally in crisis and they are not able to get out of it. So that's what we say as Marxists when we say that it's impossible to do a capitalist revolution in Russia in 1917. But to be more precise, it will be very unlikely that that could happen, because by that time, the peasantry and the workers already were having an independent role to change society that surpassed the capacity of the Russian bourgeoisie. At that point, clearly, it will be going backwards for them to wait for the bourgeoisie to be in a situation, supposedly or hypothetically, that they could do a bourgeoisie revolution. So that's what we mean that on the organic crisis of capitalism. Comrades, we have been already a little time, so I want to finish with this. If in 1917 we were able to do a revolution, and the workers and the peasants were able to get together and change history forever, and emancipate Russia or liberate Russia from all the contradictions and limitations of both capitalism and feudalism, or the Tsar system, and they were able in a small period of time to produce goods and to produce and live the living conditions of millions of workers in a country that was as big as a continent, which is Russia and the other Soviet territories. There is nothing that it could be that will be nothing compared with what could be done today. We don't have the problem of workers not having the technique. I mean, if any, there is access to the information, there is access to the training. The sophistication of the mode of production is bringing a lot of these questions that before it was owning of a little layer of society, especially in backward countries, is getting to a point that's more universal. Most of the technology that before you will find only in some countries, like tractors, right? Like, I mean, we talk about things that we give for granted today. The reality is that you find even more advanced technology in countries that you will less expect it. The iPads that we use in the United States are created in China or in Cambodia. So we have a share of technique, a share of technology globally. Not only that, but the contagious role, the ability to spread the revolution all over the world is more feasible than ever. I mean, if we see it in 1917 on a smaller scale, with some countries saw the Soviet Union as a model for millions of workers to try to change the fate of society, today we see that there is no absolutely one movement in any country that is not quickly contagious and reproduced on the next one. Thanks to the globalization, the interconnection of the economies, and also culturally and technologically, what we see is elements of a wild spread of revolution. Like we saw it with the Arab Spring, we saw it this year, and this past year in 2019, where one revolution or one big mass movement of people will succeed and know that it will be even bigger. The conditions are right, comrades. The material conditions, the technological conditions are right. The capitalism can only have its bankrupt and destruction of the civilization as we know it, for those who we are lucky enough to live in semi-civilized conditions. This is more barbarism, more terror, more hurt, and more poverty, more hunger for more millions of people unless we stop it. And learning from the spirit of the Russian Revolution, I would say that this time we will get it right, and we will get it globally, and we will succeed on the quest of socialism. For that, I will say, and I finish with this, that those who are listening this broadcasting, I will invite you to join the INT and to help us to get a strong army of people with ideas, with a clear understanding of what are the tasks after the revolution. So if there is a degeneration, if there is a fight against the bureaucrats, if there is a deviation, we have enough people of us that we can defend these ideas and start that process and be sure that the revolution ends in a good destination. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex, for taking us on a trip through what happened in Soviet Russia. I think that was a really good basis for us to continue our discussion in the chat that I've been talking about. If you're just joining us, my name's Yvonne. I'm a member of the Madison branch of the International Marxist Tendency, and you've been listening to our local comrade Alex Gillis talk a little bit about the experience of the Russian Revolution and also its degeneration, and also what we as Marxists of the International Marxist Tendency, what program we defend. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. If you enjoyed the discussion and you'd like to continue to participate, we'll be posting the Zoom link shortly, where we can discuss even further, and you don't have to ask your question maybe on a live stream. If you're interested in what you've heard so far and you'd like to get in touch with us, you can definitely email us at madison@socialistrevolution.org. Visit our website, marxist.com, as well as socialistrevolution.org. We're a small group of 6 comrades here in Madison. The US section has what we call branches or groups that do the exact same kind of work that we're doing here in several cities all around the United States. So if you're joining us from somewhere else and you're wondering if we're in your city, email us and we'll definitely hook you up. If you're in Minneapolis, if you're in St. Louis, if you're wherever you might actually be watching us from, get in touch. We need to build this thing. And we want you to join us. As Alex said, I think that's one of the most important tasks that we have right now as people who realize that the crisis of capitalism shows no sign of abating, and actually would condemn and has been condemning millions and millions of workers all around the world to completely barbaric lives and living conditions, right? So yeah, we want to hear from you. We're so glad that you joined us tonight. You can also subscribe to our paper at donorbox.org/IMT Madison-press. This thing will not build itself. So the other thing, everybody who's out there and listening, if you enjoyed it and you have a couple extra bucks to throw our way, we need it. We need it because we are building an organization, not a nonprofit, because we don't take, we don't apply for, the Soros Foundation or the Bill Gates Foundation in order to pay our staff. And yes, we have staff, but this is built out of the sacrifice of every single member of our organization who is a regular worker or student just like you, and who knows that the only way forward for humanity is to build this thing. And so you can also send us a Venmo. The Venmo would be at IVYGEER, T like Tom, S like Sam. That's one of our comrades. You can send some money that way and just in the message let us know that it's a donation for tonight's event. If you just want to get in touch with us, again, madison@socialistrevolution.org. I'm going to turn it over to Alex, I think, to just do his thanks. Actually, he already did his thanks. These are the things that happen on live camera. So again, our producer in the background has been Liam, and we would like to thank him publicly as well for all of the work that he's done tonight in order to help this broadcast run so smoothly. Liam is the one that's going to be posting the chat, the link, in Zoom. So here in a few minutes, we're going to go dark, and we're going to ask that all of you that are interested in continuing to chat with us, join us over on Zoom. So thanks again, everybody, and good night.